Hey Waffle Gang, I do hope you are well. My name is Mark and today we're checking out some more r/you mighty butthole. And if you love a Reddit story, why not consider hitting that like, subscribe, maybe that notification bell too, or let's dive straight into today's first story. Now today's first story comes from TA's sister's wedding, and it does come with multiple updates and information as well. And it's a bit of a wild ride. It's titled, "Am I the arsehole for telling my sister that she should have expected to be outshone by her best friend at her wedding? Throwaway because I don't want any family members finding my real account. My sister, Anne, 29 female, has been best friends with Ruby, 30 female, for as long as I, 25 female, can remember. So growing up, Ruby was like a second big sister to me. One thing that is important to note is that Ruby has always had the most outrageous fashion sense possible. She's the person that would wear those runway outfits that you think no one would actually wear. Anne got engaged pre-COVID. Almost as soon as it happened, she started being really weird to Ruby. When she made me maid of honor, I was kinda surprised because they've always sworn to be the maid of honors at each other's weddings. But I am her blood sister, so it wasn't that weird. But I was completely blown away when she made a group chat and I found out that Ruby wasn't even a bridesmaid. Both me and my mum tried to talk to her about it since we figured they had an argument or something, but she would only say that Ruby didn't care anyway. I know that Ruby was hurt, but she didn't want any drama, so I agreed to let it go. Throughout the whole wedding process, my mum kept asking Anne if she would invite Ruby, if she would ask Ruby's opinion, etc, etc, but Anne refused to have any contact with her or talk about anything wedding related with her whatsoever. On Saturday, my sister was married. She had a beautiful outside, socially distanced wedding, but she was seething the whole time because of Ruby's dress. It wasn't at all outrageous by Ruby's standards, so I don't believe she wanted to outshine my sister. She wore quite a simple wedding dress, but that was her choice. As maid of honor, I of course went to her fitting and that was literally the one she chose. Anne has been cursing Ruby out and saying that their friendship is over since, like she hadn't been ignoring her all throughout lockdown. Finally, I just said that she's been friends with Ruby most of her life and she knows what she dresses like and that she should have expected this. If it was that much of a problem, she should have found a way to mention it to her, or just made her a bridesmaid. Anne lost it with me. She sent Ruby some really horrible messages after she screamed at me. She didn't say a word to me all of yesterday, and she's been bad-mouthing me to our dad, who is on her side. My mum has told Anne she should apologize to Ruby for the nasty messages she sent for yelling at me, so Anne isn't talking to her either. I don't even know what's going on, but Ruby swears on her life that they didn't have an argument or anything pre-COVID. Anne says that's none of my business and I should be supporting my real sister. My dad agrees with her and she's rallied the other bridesmaid against me, so I don't know. Am I the arsehole? But then OP added some just to clear some things up section, which I imagine will be replying to some of the comments as well. So we're going to cover that straight away before we move on to a couple of those comments. Just to clear some things up. 1. Ruby didn't wear a wedding dress or anything really outrageous. It was a dark red bodycon dress in a satiny material. There were lots of people in form-fitting dresses. The bridesmaids were wearing them and she didn't look out of place. Edit again, some of you people are ridiculous lol, assuming the absolute worst case scenario. It wasn't a spaghetti strap dress that just barely covered her butt. It was an appropriate length and had long sleeves. 2. If this needs saying twice, the bridesmaids were wearing bodycon dresses, so were many other guests. It wasn't a particularly traditional affair. Nobody was offended by our figures. Ruby's dress didn't massively stick out. 3. Ruby is very attractive. She always has been, but I never thought it was an issue for Anne before. 4. Ruby and Anne have been best friends for 25 years. They didn't grow apart or anything. They stayed in constant contact, even as adults, and then Anne suddenly wasn't talking to Ruby anymore. My mum and I weren't trying to be controlling. We were worried. We assumed that something really bad had happened for them to cut contact overnight. When Anne refused to talk about it, my mum was only more worried because she's normally an open book. 5. I don't love Ruby more than Anne or anything like that. The only reason I'm so close to Ruby is that because Anne used to be so close to Ruby. They were basically inseparable, so I grew up tagging after both of them. Of course I love Anne very much, I just think she's being unreasonable in this situation. 6. Ruby was always going to be at the actual wedding. The phrasing was bad on my part, sorry. When Mum was suggesting that Anne invite Ruby, it was to wedding prep, things like dress shopping, etc. 7. I don't know if Dave, the groom, has feelings for Ruby. I never thought of that. They've met many times and there's never been any signs that he does. I definitely do not think it is an affair, because then surely my sister wouldn't want to marry Dave and neither would want Ruby at the wedding at all. Ruby doesn't have a history of going after Anne's boyfriends or crushes. So now we're going to cover 2 or 3 of the comments just to get a gist of what people were feeling down there. So DSZ says, I hear yakety sax while reading your post. Was the wedding held under a huge red and white striped tent? Were there elephants and jugglers? Anne sounds like the ringmaster of the shit show. Not the arsehole. Edit, making Ruby a bridesmaid or maid of honor would have been the obvious solution here. Then Anne literally would have been able to dictate the dress code. The fact that Anne is seething over some faux dress gate during should be one of the happiest times in her life does not bode well for her marriage. Where is the groom on all this? If this is what the honeymoon looks like. Then they said, I'm assuming groom. Apologies if that's wrong. Northern Lit Up says, not the arsehole, your sister created her own drama here, not Ruby. There were so many ways around what happened, which it doesn't even sound like it was that big of a deal. Talk to Ruby about what she wears to the wedding. Kind of bridezilla, but still, she's her friend. Make her a bridesmaid, literally the easiest solution ever, or just don't invite her. If there was some big falling out, which I suspect maybe there is, because it just seems really weird, not your circus, not your flying red monkeys. Then Lovely Panda asks, info, do you think it's possible there's a lot more going on behind the scenes? To which OP replied saying, very possible. I thought that there must have been an argument for the friendship to stop so abruptly, but Anne got mad every time I mentioned it, so I dropped it on her end. I called Ruby to ask, but she said that nothing has happened. If they did have a fight, they're not talking about it. And one more from Titanium, who replies to OP saying, sounds like there's something going on behind the scenes. I sense your sister feels either jealousy or resentment towards Ruby. It's possible she's just not willing to talk about it with anyone yet. Maybe there's some solid reason why she didn't want Ruby to be a part of her bridesmaids team. And as I said, we got several updates on this one as well, so this is obviously going to go a lot deeper. But to me, for the initial post, it was hard to give a judgment, because you know there's more to come from this, because it just doesn't make sense for them, like they said in this, for them to like separate so abruptly. Is it jealousy over dress style or looks, or is Dave involved somehow here? It could just go a whole host of ways. But if I was just to base it on the initial information that we was given from OP there, I would say, Bride is overreacting, as, they were best friends. They know each other more than anyone, I assume, and it could have been talked about very, very easily. But there's more to this, isn't there? So let's go on to the first update. Based on some advice I'm receiving, I'm going to tell Anne this morning how much she means to me and that I'm there for her. But she's seething again, so I'm not trying to. Dave asked me if I could talk to Anne, because they've also apparently had a massive fight because he tried to defend Ruby on the wedding night. He asked me if I could explain where he misstepped and how to make it up to her. This is the first time he's ever asked me for help with their relationship, so he's clearly at a loss. I said I was just as confused, and we didn't even know why she wasn't in the bridal party, so he should just try and talk it out with Anne. This is where it gets weird. Dave said that the reason Ruby wasn't in either wedding party was because he wanted her as a best woman, and Anne wanted her as maid of honor, but Anne wouldn't budge and said that they should just drop her from both parties to be fair. He said that she explained it to Ruby, and that's why they had a fight, because Ruby wanted to be included. I said okay and just hung up, but the more I think about it, the more confused I am. If they had a massive fight about Ruby being maid of honor, surely Ruby would remember. Also, I don't know why Dave would want Ruby as his best woman, when to my understanding he only met her after he started dating Anne. I am really taking your advice not to meddle to heart, which is a nightmare because now my curiosity is totally piqued, so I won't bring it up. It's possible that this is all I ever know, and this will bug me to my grave, but I have made a vow not to push Anne anymore on it. Thank you everyone for your comments. Thank you all the Not the Arsehole people for reassuring me that I'm not the one acting crazy. Thank you to all the helpful You're the Arsehole and everyone sucked here verdicts that helped me see how I could change my behaviour in the future to be a more supportive sister. Now we're going to go straight into update 2. I'm even more confused. Dave called me about 30 minutes ago asking me in a very angry tone of voice if any of his groomsmen behaved inappropriately towards me. I asked what, and he asked again. I could hear Anne in the background shouting something. I said that they had been perfect gentlemen at the wedding and that I hadn't had any contact with them since. He then asked me if Ruby knew that she was meant to be best woman. I said not to my understanding, but it was possible that I don't know, as both she and Anne had been quite secretive about what happened between them, and that he'd better be off asking them themselves. He laughed and hung up. Ruby has texted me asking what's happened and if I knew about the best woman / maid of honor thing. Just now, I got a message from one of the bridesmaids saying that if Dave calls me, I shouldn't answer him. Anne is on the phone to my dad, screaming it sounds like. I have no clue what's going on, but I think somewhere in this mess is the truth of what actually happened. Everything seems to be exploding. I now think that the bridesmaid, or at least that one in particular, are involved, and if things keep happening at this pace, I think I should eventually find out what in the flying fuck is happening. Update 3. There has been a lot of shouting and tears today. Honestly, I'm exhausted, but so many people have commented for the update, so here it is. I'm still kind of in shock. Anne has been lying to just about everyone. The story is very complicated and long. This list is actually what I use to wrap my own head around it. It's all the facts I have in chronological order. 1. Dave has been to jail and is an ex-drug addict. He met Ruby before he met Anne. After he recovered, he was really struggling with money and Ruby helped him a lot. He considers her to be one of his closest friends. 2. 2 years after Dave was doing well at his job and much more stable and functional, around this time, Ruby introduced him to Anne. 3. Anne was very reluctant to have a relationship with Dave because of his past, but she has strong feelings for him. Eventually they began dating, but she was still ashamed of the person he used to be. So she told us that they met over a dating app. Dave consented to this at the time. 4. As Dave became more comfortable with himself and the relationship became more serious, he told Anne that she needed to be honest with us about his history. She agreed to tell us, but she didn't. She told Dave that she had wrote a fake letter from my family about how we were really grateful for his honesty and accepted him. She told Ruby that my parents had reacted really badly, so Ruby never brought it up with Dave or my family because she thought it was still a very sensitive topic. 5. When Dave proposed, Anne started freaking out about the wedding. Dave wanted people from his support group to be there, Ruby as his best woman, etc., which would expose the lies. But she still didn't want to tell us who Dave was or Dave that she had lied to him, so she decided to continue lying instead of coming clean. So Anne pretended to be really upset that she couldn't have Ruby as her maid of honor, so she could make the argument that she could be dropped from both wedding parties. She told Dave that she had explained their decision to Ruby and that Ruby had taken issue with it to keep him happy. In reality, she knew that if Ruby knew she was meant to be the best woman, it could easily get back to me and my mum, and they raised questions from us about Ruby's relationship with Dave. She didn't tell Ruby anything at all, and that's why Ruby was so confused about what happened and couldn't think of anything. Told Dave and all of his friends from his support group that they couldn't mention the addiction in speeches or even casual conversation because it was a sensitive subject for certain family members before the wedding. Told the bridesmaids so many lies about Ruby. She told them that she had a habit of causing scenes, that she was going to try and sleep with the groomsmen, that one of them was an ex-boyfriend of hers that dumped her, that she would get way too drunk. Essentially, she painted Ruby as a disaster waiting to happen, so the bridesmaids wouldn't like her, and also so they could keep her away from certain people, specifically the ones that also knew Dave at the wedding. Anne also told the bridesmaids that the only reason that Ruby was invited is because I idolize her, so they wouldn't repeat any of the lies she told me. 7. After the wedding, Anne put on her enormous meltdown about the dress. The bridesmaids obviously didn't have a very positive opinion on Ruby, so they were easy to convince that it was meant as a genuine slight. My dad did what Anne apparently expected everyone to do by caving immediately because she was the bride. If me and my mum had done the same, Anne would have used it as an excuse to cut Ruby out of everyone's life. 8. She tried to do the same thing with Dave's groomsmen by insisting to him that they had said inappropriate things about the bridesmaids. The idea was to basically remove anybody that knew the truth about Dave from the general social circle so it wouldn't come up again. 9. Dave smells a rat. He asked what exactly the issue was with Ruby's dress and what exactly his friends had said. Anne panicked and accused him of not loving her, choosing his friends over her, etc. And it turned into a massive argument. Dave was mad and very suspicious, so he started calling people up, trying to figure out what happened. 10. A couple of the bridesmaids said that Anne was telling the truth about the groomsmen. She asked and pressured them to, but most were kind of weirded out by the request, and I think they successfully got that across to Dave. He called me to ask if I knew what was going on. Anne told Dave that I was just like him, caring about Ruby more than her, and also that I wasn't there when it happened. But the timing of the story didn't match up, so Dave called me anyway. That was the weird phone call. 11, at this point, he knew she was spouting BS, so he asked her up front what was going on. She broke down and told Dave everything. 12, he was fuming. He texted us all to let us know about his past and then basically kicked Anne out. She came to us where she then had to explain again everything. Anne is absolutely shaken. I never considered her capable of this kind of deception and manipulation, and I don't think she has ever done something like this before. Contrary to what some commenters seem to believe, I don't hate my sister. I feel sorry for her, even though I'm really hurt by what she did, because she feels so guilty and absolutely miserable because she's worried that things will never be worked out with Dave. She's gone to bed now very upset because our mum won't even look at her. She's fuming that Anne would deceive and hurt her and so many other people like this. I do understand where she's coming from. My dad is also very shocked and hurt. Anne texts Ruby. She sent her a message explaining and apologizing, but obviously Ruby is really angry and upset. She just told her that she couldn't speak to her right now, but maybe she'd call her again in the morning once they'd both had a chance to calm down. Dave is probably the most hurt out of everyone, and I understand why. He wouldn't speak to Anne, but he did tell me that he really thought that he had our acceptance and that the letter she had written to him had been the most treasured possession ever since he received it, and had to find out that it was false was absolutely crushing. I told him that we did accept him for who he was and that nobody blamed him, but I don't think it helped much. He asked for distance from our family, and I understand why. I'm not sure when he will be willing to speak to Anne again, or if he wants to be a husband after this. I wouldn't blame him if he goes on to find someone else. Thanks Reddit, it turned out everyone was way off base, although I don't think anyone could have predicted this. But a lot of the comments were very insightful and gave me food for thought, despite everyone kind of looking in the wrong directions. Except the weirdos about the dress. You know who you are. And there is a further update to this one as well. And it all came from hiding her current, if still the case, husband's past. Went to these great lengths to manipulate and hide this past from them, and I was really feeling the pain from Dave at the end there, that he thought his new family had accepted him with this letter and it was his most treasured possession from them, and he just felt accepted by them and it was all a lie. And my question is, how can you go on to trust someone who's gone to these great lengths to manipulate people and lie to people like this? I can't see this ending well for Anne in the end, for after what she's done, and I don't think she really deserves that forgiveness either, in my opinion, but who am I? Let's go on to the update to see what that says. These past 2 weeks have been very stressful. Anne and my mum have been fighting and crying for most of it. We learned that this deception of Anne's was not out of the blue. She has had this obsession with her image for a very long time. She confessed to a lot of stuff from secondary school and her job. Some of it was worrying and some of it was really scary and manipulative. I feel so distant from the person she has become. There's tension between us that I'm not sure will ever go away, even though it really pains me as well because she's my sister. Once my dad heard some of the revelations, he decided that Anne should go to a therapist. Anne really struggled against the decision, which led to a massive fight between her and my dad. I've never seen my dad so angry, neither has she, which is probably why she eventually agreed. The therapist is supposed to help Anne's process her emotions after everything that's happened and also hopefully get to the root of her problem. A lot of the comments suggested that our family wasn't healthy in the way we interact with each other. I'm conflicted on this because on the one hand, me and my mum were right that something was very wrong, but then that doesn't mean that we didn't behave badly, if that makes sense. So I suggested family therapy. My parents are looking into it. Hopefully we can learn a bit more about boundaries and each other and eventually move on from this. Anne has been talking a lot to Ruby. From the sounds of it, Ruby is still very upset, but I've been taking the advice not to meddle so much in their relationship, and I am leaving them to it. Me and Ruby still speak a lot, but not about Anne. Dave sent a message 2 days ago that I think has sadly resolved this very terrible situation. After learning that this is part of a pattern of behaviour, he doesn't think he wants to be in a marriage with Anne at all, as he feels that She hasn't only hurt him deeply but deceived him about the type of person she is. I know from Ruby that he is also seeking therapy and has confided in friends about what happened, so he has a strong support system around him. I'm not getting involved with him other than that, as I think he deserves distance from the family after everything, but knowing he's okay does make me feel a little better. Anne has taken this news badly. When she first got the message, I think she had a panic attack. She was breathing really quickly and shaking and crying. She knows that Dave learned about her past from Ruby and is absolutely furious with Ruby for telling him. She is just as preoccupied with the thought of being someone divorced as she is with the fact that Dave is leaving her. I really hope that the therapist helps her get better, and although I'm not taking it as hard as my mum, I do feel guilty for not noticing this sooner because she's just not well. And then a lovely person by the name of Emma Royd, great name, says they fished out all of OP's relevant comments to replies, so I'm going to read the direct replies to those. So OP was saying, I don't know exactly what made him decide, maybe all of it put together, but there was a lot we found out that Ruby could have told him. I cut it out of the original text because of word count. Next comment says, Anne selected friends on who she should be friends with. She falsified interest to get close to the right people, which wasn't too unsettling because I feel like a lot of people do that, to a certain extent. But she also created rumors to remove different people from friendship groups and regularly caused trouble in her own, in a way that it wasn't likely to be traced back to her, to make her seem like the best friend and get rid of certain people. Some of the factors she considered were things like weight, interests, their significant others, and sometimes just the size of the group. If she felt her circle was too big, someone had to be cut. Next comment. She performed deliberately badly on tests to fit her image. E.g., her image is that she is not good at chemistry, so she had to deliberately answer some of the chemistry questions wrong, so she wouldn't get higher than a C. What? Next comment. Anne made life deliberately difficult for teachers that she felt she wouldn't have if everything was right. Sorry, this is quite a difficult concept to explain, but basically, a lot of the things she does is to make things right. Like an ideal world, basically. So if a teacher didn't fit well into the world, she would deliberately incite other students to make their lives worse, etc. Always while looking like she was a good student, of course. She also disliked teachers who she felt had an image of her that didn't match up with her own. At least 2 of these teachers I know left, and 1 was even fired. Next comment. She also made the life of people at her work terrible and caused many of them to leave over the years. She spread rumors about them, gave them incorrect instructions to make them look incompetent and embarrass them. She would do tiny annoying things like take their supplies, sometimes even replacing them with different ones, just to mess with their heads. Next comments. Large parts of Anne's lies have become her personality. We think that she feels genuinely emotionally affected by things she insisted people did to her that we now know were lies. Even though they didn't happen, she seems to feel actually hurt by them. Interests she made up that she ended up taking to the extreme are still hobbies until today. She based major life decisions on what's right and her lies. There's a lot of tiny individual stories that she told us or that we are beginning to piece together, but that's kind of the gist of what we know. And like I said earlier, I can't blame Dave for wanting to be out of that situation and separate for the whole family, for now at least. I don't think he's ever going to get back with Anne, but if he wants to communicate with the family and, get the full story of what happened, it might be some sort of closure for him, or it might even do further damage. What do you guys make of this one? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. As always, I would love to hear them if you have a moment of your time to share them. A huge thank you for spending 20 to 30 minutes with me today, getting involved in the stories and in the channel in general. It hugely helps out, liking, subscribing, supporting, whatever you want to do, but never any pressure to do it either. Thank you for your love, your time and support, and I will see you in the next one. Take care, guys. Much love.